Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome back. And I think there's at least a few faces who are not registered conference attendees, so welcome to this public event, the third public event of our conference. So just to recap, I think you all know this by now. No coffee in the theater, blah, blah, blah. After this, we'll continue the conference next door. If some of you brought luggage and things like that, please feel free to bring it over and leave it at the coat rack over in the Heights. As a reminder, the keynote will be recorded and uploaded onto the CIHE YouTube channel after the fact, so just keep that in mind. But now I have the very enjoyable business of introducing my dear friend and colleague, Professor Rajani Naidoo. So Rajani, as probably most of you know, is currently Professor of Higher Education Management, UNESCO Chair of Higher Education Management, and Director of the International Center for Higher Education Management at the University of Bath. That is a mouthful, Rajani. And she is also, because apparently she had way too much free time before, now the Vice President for Community and Inclusion at Bath, which is a position that entails leading the diversity, equality, and inclusion strategy for the university. Prior to joining the faculty at Bath, Rajani held a range of faculty and management positions in the UK and South Africa, including at an institution that aimed to contribute to the transformation of higher education in post-apartheid South Africa. And she sits on advisory and steering committees for organizations, including British Council, European Foundation for Management Development, etc. I think probably most of you are aware of Rajani's scholarship, but if you are less so, it's very interdisciplinary, it's very multi-level, and focuses on the influence of global, national, and organizational forces on research, teaching, and the wider role of university and society. And I could not be more delighted to have Rajani with us today, so please join me in welcoming her.
So thank you very, very much, Rebecca, for this very kind and exciting invitation. And thank you also to Phil Olbach, Gerardo Blanco, Hans de Wit, and also especially thank you so much to Selina for all her support as well. I would like to talk today about the rise of artificial intelligence in relation to the future of higher education. AI is often defined as machine-based learning that receives human input to produce predictions, recommendations, and decisions. I, however, want to also talk about AI as a form of empire building. So in my talk today, I will not focus on the impact of AI on teaching, on learning, on assessment, and on research. These are incredibly important areas for our sector, and these are areas that are currently being researched by many colleagues in the field, including some that are here. What I would like to talk about is more philosophical. I want to look at the role that AI is playing in society, and in light of that, I want to look at what are the responsibilities that this gives to higher education in relation to that role of AI. The impact of AI is often sharply polarized into an AI utopian or an AI dystopian view. In relation to the future of work, the utopians believe that dangerous and repetitive tasks will be replaced by robots. We will all be freed to be more creative. We will also, of course, have a universal basic income, so we don't need to work at all if we don't want to. On a more planetary scale, AI will solve our climate crisis. The Boston Consulting Group, for example, has said that AI can be used to support all stakeholders in taking a more informed and data-driven approach. We can combat carbon emission. We can build a greener society. AI can also be used to reweight global climate efforts towards the most at-risk regions. So that's the utopian view. The AI dystopians warn us, on the other hand, that AI and automation will replace human workers. It will lead to job loss, and it will lead to economic insecurity. They cite the privacy concerns, and they show us how workers are being subjected to hyper-surveillance. They also point to a more existential threat, that we may be laying the foundations for a super-intelligent AI. It will be capable of learning at an exponential rate. It could surpass human intelligence and control, and it can evolve to actually dominate or to wipe out humanity. So there's a problem with both these views. In both these views, AI is presented as a disembodied entity that floats above the material world. It is seen to be engaged in advanced techno-computation, orchestrating grand designs across our planet. As theorists such as Crawford and Farsi and Heatherly, who are engaged in looking at techno-power, they show us that actually AI is very embodied. The AI is very material. It feeds off the grueling work of people in the lithium mines. It sucks up planetary energy. It does not come to life independently, but it is generated amongst dominant beliefs and dominant political will. So AI is really a registry of power that reinforces, that erodes, and that develops new powers of relations. I refer to AI as an empire because of the AI infrastructure and its superstructure. And this is still dominated by a very small number of mega corporations working with powerful governments. Countries have forgotten about the knowledge race. They are now engaged in the AI race. The concern is that state regulation is reduced, and we allow what is called disruptive innovation for geopolitical advantage to really become very dominant. And very soon, universities will be called upon to help in the AI arms race. The problem with all of this is this super conflict, this war for AI has a very, very real potential to erode the common good. It's also an empire because it seeps very widely and very deeply into the fabric of our society. It's used to make decisions. It's used to make decisions in cybersecurity, health, finance, banking, crime, what we read, how we shop, who we vote for, and who we interact with. Who do we communicate to? So AI has the potential to centralize power and to refashion the world to benefit this powerful minority in two main ways. Firstly, it introduces new forms of capitalist accumulation through mass data harvesting. It takes away the intellectual and creative labor of human beings. Some of the wealthiest corporations in history, like Microsoft, Apple, Google, Meta, Amazon, seize human knowledge and they seal it off. They take it away from the global commons and they redistribute it in machine recomposed forms to make profit. And all of this is without the consent or compensation of the human beings whose lifetime of labor has trained these machines. We're seeing now a whole collective of artists who are basically accusing these corporations of stealing their creative labor, and they're basically saying that this is a heist. You know, usually you have a gang that goes into an art gallery and steals the paintings, and they go into prison if they're caught. This is happening on a massive scale, and it appears to be totally legal. Secondly, AI obscures what it's doing. It hides the way in which it accumulates. It does this by impacting on democracy and political divisions. It steers people into echo chambers of repeated and reinforced media and political content. And while I say all of this, there are, of course, a huge amount of amazing people working to resist this, people that are developing their own media feeds, their own algorithms, and so on. So the picture is always two-sided. Second, it sanitizes discrimination for profit. It leads to what researchers have called data-centric oppression. So what we have is unverified, untracked models of data that usually draws on skin color, on class, on gender, or even as accent, as a proxy to limit what people can and cannot do. It makes decisions in so many spheres of our life. For example, how people are selected for jobs. There's a very scary study which looks at how AI identifies not real gang members, but potential gang members. And when researchers have looked very deeply into that data, they found that there were a number of toddlers in that database who apparently all claimed to have been gang members. So these terribly, terribly flawed predictions are made with no consequence to the designers, but huge consequences for people, and especially people that are most vulnerable. One researcher has said that AI and these algorithms actually function in the role of an oracle. The decision-making is completely mystical. We can't see it, we don't know where it comes from. But because it's big data, because it's technology, we agree with it, we believe that it's real and it's uncontested. So in this way, AI really accelerates technological power, and it intensifies newer forms of predatory capitalism. But there's another quite interesting issue as well, which I would like to talk about, and the theorist Farsi has spoken about this, and she has said that we should also consider how deep learning AI becomes like an autonomous artificial actor. It has decision-making capacities which have been transferred from humans, but then the machine takes over, the deep neural networks take over. And what she means by this is that as you get more and more sophisticated algorithms, more and more sophisticated models, you get more and more layers, you get more nodes, and you get all sorts of really complicated computational operations occurring. So the people who design the machine knows what data they put in, and they can see what data comes out, what's the solution, what's the decision. But actually, they have no idea what the machine did. They have no idea how the machine came to the decision that's made. And that has huge implications for transparency, for ethics, all sorts of ways. It's very exciting to them. They kind of think, well, that's amazing. It seems like the right answer. but is it the right answer? Because how do we know how that data was used? So I find that incredibly worrying. I want to turn now very quickly to talk about what can universities do. And I want to leave quite a bit of time for discussion, so I will just point to three. So the first one is we really need to theorize AI in a more careful and more considered way. We need to develop a comprehensive theory to look at states and corporations, how they work together, what drives and dominates AI, who owns it. We need to look at how mass data is captured. We need to look at the socio-technical systems. We need to look at the people behind the algorithms, the people in Amazon, the people in the click factories, etc. What work and labor are they doing? We need to look at the miners. We need to look at the mines. There's such a complicated and big picture here that would be really important to decode. But I think the one thing that I would also like to add is we also need to look at that technological, that autonomy, quasi-autonomy of the machine in technical terms that Fawzi is talking about, because there is something there that we need to work out, and we need to work that out by really working with coders and mathematicians and so on. And I've started working with computer scientists, and it's incredibly difficult. The disciplines are so different when you think about sociology or higher education. It's very different. And an example is when we first met, we both spoke about the problem that students couldn't integrate. And I was talking about, in my role as Vice President of Community and Inclusion, I found more and more that students were not integrating, and this was really problematic. And my colleague said he agreed with me 100%. He said, I know it's a big problem in the University of Bath. Students don't integrate. They do not know how to integrate. 20 minutes into the conversation, I realized that I was talking about social integration, and he was talking about students integrating numbers in mathematics. So it taught both of us a lot, and that small example really made us understand how different the frames and the levels and the orientation of disciplines are, but that was also really very helpful. And I think we need to basically, by bringing together these big multidisciplinary teams, it also means that we really need to resist all these efforts of downgrading subjects like history and philosophy and law and subjects that deal with ethics, etc., because that's the real problem. Now, students are looking at AI and they're thinking, this is going to be exciting. This is going to give me work. And the other subjects, universities are saying, well, that's not cost effective. That doesn't bring in enough revenue. It'll make our employability stats look bad. So I think it's really, really important that we show how important all these more traditional subjects are. And I think especially what's really important is that we bring this type of thinking into the curricula for all students. We have young people who are living and breathing this world, and they need to understand right from the start that it's very attractive, but there are also ways in which we need to understand where it comes from, some of the dysfunctional effects, the harms, etc. And more than the students, we need to find ways as universities of public engagement, of talking to people beyond our university about AI and the effects of AI. Second, I think we can really help in the call for greater transparency. So there's a big call now that we all saying that AI needs to be more transparent. It needs to be more ethical. And part of the issue with ethics as well, and maybe just to go back to my previous point about what do we teach students, apart from the AI courses having a much more integrated theoretical and philosophical framework, we also need to focus very much on ethics. Because one of the problems when you look at interviews of people who have developed these programs with predictive policing, etc., which is complete nonsense, it places the wrong people in trouble, it shatters their lives, they say, but I was just the scientist. I'm not the person who implemented it. So the separation of people who are developing these programs from what is actually happening from the implications is very, very negative. So I think by bringing in ethics right into our programs, that's going to be incredibly important. We can also help in the call for greater transparency. So, for example, Jenna Burrell has spoken about transparency as firstly, we need to protest about secrecy, about state and corporation secrecy in relation to AI, where they keep talking about it as if, well, it's our competitive advantage, we have to keep it secret. Secondly, we have to look at the technical literacy, the technological literacy, and one of the most important things we can do as a university, because we know people are biased, data is biased, is actually to really open out and recruit young people who are of color, people from different types of backgrounds, more women, etc., and to make sure that they survive in our universities and that they succeed. The third is much more difficult, and this is what Fazi was talking about, this mismatch between how much can a human brain compute and understand and what happens inside the machine. And we have choices here. We could either say, if it's not explainable, we don't do it, we stop it. Or we could try to find some ways in which we can find some translation. And people have started talking about these old sociological terms like commensurality. You know, how do you link up two bodies of knowledge where they don't speak the same language? It's so different. How do you translate that? And there's some interesting work going on now about finding an interface between the human, a translational interface between the human and the machine. And of course, this is also incredibly scary because Elon Musk has basically said, bad AI will destroy us. Be really careful. We need good AI. Human beings need to be better than the machines. So he's thinking about, of course, cybernetics. How do we put machines into the people? So incredibly interesting and incredibly scary as well. And I think I want to just probably end by saying, you know, what all of this leads us to is this whole idea of what does it mean to be a human? What's the difference between human learning and machine learning? Can we actually say that a machine is intelligent? And the second issue for me is what's very worrying is the whole totality of human experience, of human life, of who we are, is being captured by data points that are separated. So we all become data points that can be translated, that can be manipulated. So human beings through these systems are being dehumanized. At the same time, the machines and AI and algorithms are appearing or being presented to be more human. You know, words like the machine is thinking, it's thinking, let's give it some time to think. Or the most interesting is when the algorithms just get something completely wrong. It's total nonsense. And the fathers of AI basically say, oh yes, the machine is hallucinating. It's tripping. And of course, if you kind of my generation and slightly older, you kind of think, oh, that's LSD, tripping, hippies, you know, all of that. So it gives it an aura that's very human, kind of exciting, a bit edgy, etc. And the most worrying thing for me is that people are also talking about the fact that machines can now, when you look at all the data levels, and what's happening now is something called backpropagation, where from the top layer, the data comes back down, and it changes all the bottom layers. And what they've linked that to is this philosophical notion of if we can reflect, human beings, we reflect on what we do. We don't just do it. We're not autonomic. And because we reflect, we have a sense of consciousness. And they're now saying, well, look, machines are developing a sense of consciousness because they are able to look back and they are able to change themselves. So I think for us as humanists working in universities, that's going to become a really important topic. And I want to just end by saying, you know, I'm not claiming to be a kind of technological Luddite. I love machines and computers and computer games and all of that, but there are some very real dangers. And I think the optimists are right in a lot of ways. AI has the potential to be hugely transformative and helpful to us. And I give you an example. I have, at our university, we have a student who is one of the most inspirational people I know. She has a syndrome which creates blindness and hearing loss, and this gets worse and worse every year. And yet she has climbed the base camp in the Himalayas. She's a concert pianist, and she's doing a PhD. So she's incredibly amazing. And when I look at the research that she's doing, she's looking at how AI can actually help people to perceive pictures and images and so on. And when you look at those sorts of examples, you really can see the potential and can see how important this is going forward. So I really hope that in universities we can focus on the potential, we can work at making AI better for humanity, but also that we can stand very firm against some of the more darker aspects of AI that actually threaten to ruin us as human beings and destroy our planet. Thank you very much.
Do you want to take one at a time or a group?
One at a time, I
Okay.
think.
All right. Any questions for Rajani? We have the mics, I think. Yeah. Lots of questions for Rajani. Hurrah.
Thank you. Thank you, Rajani. This was a really fascinating talk. Really enjoyed it. I guess my question is really about the how, because I shared all your concerns, and there is a risk, obviously, that we end up producing the same sort of discourse of resistance that we heard 30 years ago about the development of the internet, for instance. And you, in my opinion, you raised some really important point in terms of what universities should be concentrating on in this context, but you didn't really address the how. You raised two important points, I think, which I see as important obstacle in terms of the how. One is, or in fact, no, the two are connected. So about the capacity of universities to act in the interest of the common good. Now, I'm putting this into the context of where universities are, particularly in systems like the one where we're both working, which are highly marketized. And universities do not have much capacity to act in the interest of the public good. So how do we act in relation to researching the impact or in relation to the ethics that you were mentioning in a context where universities are losing this capacity to act in the interest of the common good?
Thank you, Jan. That's an incredibly important question, and you're absolutely right. We're becoming increasingly marketized, instrumental, etc. And I think all I can say is that we have to just act in the spaces. So, for example, we could go to, if we're heading research centers, for example. I'm looking at Simon and Phil and Hans and other people here. I think to convince, one of the things that we've done with equality, diversity, and inclusion is we went to the funding agencies, and we've basically started talking to them about putting those principles into their funding mechanisms. And not just so that people wouldn't just pay lip service, but they would actually, you would have to show how your team, the ethics, the diversity would all work. And I think it would be really important to do something like that in relation to AI as well, to go where we have some hope, some measure of success, where we have some personal connections, and kind of change the way in which the funding works for AI. We're never going to be able to compete with, Google or any of these big entities, but for the small things that we do, we can actually ensure that we have the ethics built into that. And I think, for young people, it's really important how we do have the capacity to confront our students with different models of the world. And the undergraduates are, people say that undergraduates are incredibly instrumental, and I found that actually once their imagination is sparked and they get really interested, they would be keen to learn, they would be keen to do something, and that would be kind of one way in which I think we can move forward as universities. But I don't have, great hope. I don't think universities are going to rise up and be the new beacons, because we know from history that doesn't happen. So as I get older, I kind of think if we can create a little space somewhere to develop this sort of work, then for me, I feel we have achieved something small, but something.
Hi, Rajani. Thank you so much. Great ideas as always. At my institution, we're fortunate, perhaps by accident, to have a strong kind of digital sociology group within the Department of Education that can think about these things, that fed into the university's response, for instance, by Turnitin, which is a plagiarism detecting software. The preoccupation of some of our colleagues was about AI being used to cheat, and we'd said, well, you have to push back against this very limited, I think, understanding of AI. And the university has since rejected this kind of proposal of Turnitin to detect AI, principally because I think the position of the university is that AI will play, and is probably already playing a big role in knowledge production on the part of the students. And to police it in this way, my institution probably is different from others in this respect, doesn't think that AI should be banned in the production of knowledge as it's being assessed. That's been very recent, and as I'd mentioned, by accident and fortune, within the department, in our Department of Education, there is already capacity, but things seem to be moving so fast. So going back to Jan's question about the how, so we're a big place, so we have some of those resources, but when I attend some of their seminars, the main takeaway is that, wow, I don't even know what I don't know. about AI. And so how can that capacity building be built up? Do all our new appointments need to be specialists in digital education, digital learning, digital knowledge production?
Yeah, the debate about the discussion on plagiarism is actually kind of really interesting in a way, because I think I was telling someone last night that what's kind of interesting is all students can say use ChatGPT. But often in our university, a student from a family who are academics or who've been to university write their essay and show their parents, or the parents say, you know, let's show it to your uncle who's actually at the university, or whatever. So there's the whole plagiarism help support is something that's really interesting and would need to be picked up as well. And I think your second point is really important as well. And I would say that, you know, we need to have people in the university who are experts, who are at the top of the game, who kind of have some connections to the cutting edge knowledge. We'll never be, you know, because of all the privacy, etc., we won't be at the heart of where it's really happening. It's happening in defense as well. It's happening in very interesting places in society. But I think the one thing we can do is just to teach, you know, you could call it AI literacy or algorithmic literacy. Just the principles of how does it work? What does it do? What's the impact? So for example, in our student support system now, we're looking at automation of student support. And one of the issues that I've brought in is that it has to be the Pro-Vice Chancellor for Learning and Teaching who makes that decision at the end. It can't be generated by a machine. So I think you're absolutely right. It's so fast moving. It's so hard to catch up. So, you know, we need to invest in people that are really at the top of their game. And this may have some unhelpful issues for universities, because you'd have to just pay them so much more than you pay other staff to retain them. And then you have to find people who can translate all of the things that they are learning so that everyone can understand it. But I think that's all we would be able to hope for, because there'd be no way that we would be able to have everyone to a sufficient kind of level of understanding beyond the principles. Okay.
The good news is our next panel is on the same kind of topic.
Yeah. And I think
Well, thank you, Rajani, for your excellent presentation. It really provides a lot of, inputs. I just would like to suggest, if no one, I'm sure a lot of people here heard the podcast by the New York Times when they interviewed Geoffrey Hinton, the so-called godfather of the AA, and he was really concerned, right? He shared a lot of your concerns. He said he quit Google after seeing the experiments with weapons and what this can do with that, and all the future that we can see about the implications of and the uses of AA. But I would like to ask you, I don't know if it's a question, but what do you think are these main barriers to stop making more accountable the use of AA? Because you said several things, but one, of course, is the economic structure. But to me, the most interested are the beliefs. And I think because we are in higher education, we at some point feel we need to believe in innovation, right? And in technology, why not? So I don't know to what extent this is so important. And That's why it's so hard not to, to be skeptical and to say, well, we need to question this because we really don't know where this is going to take us. Thank you.
Yeah, Rajani, thank you. I think we all, or most of us, are old enough to remember when internet came. And part of the discussion of what you say reminds me a lot of what we have heard at that time. I think Jan mentioned that as well. And so my question here is, if the same worries that we have about intellectual property, transparency, ethics, etc., and I remember when Napster came and took all the music public, you remember? And everyone was concerned about that, right? So where is the difference between AI and internet? And what is it what we have to do on regulation side in order to, or what can we learn from what we did with internet to maintain that equilibrium and actually use the AI for all the good things it can do and that we know of, and actually, take the good things out of it and avoid the bad things.
Thank you. So I think for the first question, which is a really important one, and I think that, I mean, I don't know how you found that interview. It was fascinating. You kind of, sort of, I don't even want to say this publicly, but sort of admired him for his thinking. You just thought like, wow, because when, especially the technological part of his thinking, when you thought how he set it up, how he thought about it, and so on. But you're really right about beliefs, because, one of the things that he said was, well, I realized that human beings and machines are not that different, that actually machines might be able to do things better. And once I realized that, I was comfortable with that and I could go on. So you can really see the values and the beliefs there. And I think there is something also for us as higher education researchers where we want to discover things, we want innovation, we get really excited about it. I developed using a very basic language, like a little worm that went up and then went like that and fell. And I was utterly excited, like I created it. So I think there's that aura of inventing that's really hard to kind of close that black box now that it's been opened. But I think with all of these people, I'm quite suspicious that suddenly they've realized that what they've created will threaten humanity. And I kind of wonder, and this is probably me being very cynical, but I wonder whether there's some other reason behind all of them now coming out and saying, there's a big problem, let's have a moratorium. Because when you look at their beliefs, what does technology mean for them? It's very, very different from what innovation and technology mean for us. And so I think, I was talking about the regulation and the values and so on, but I think it's really important to also add beliefs in, the belief about technology, the belief about what progress is. And so thank you very much for that. That's a really helpful idea to go forward with. Matthias, yes, we were all, I don't know, when we moved from all sorts of things, change is always difficult and it's hard and so on. And the internet has already swayed us in so very many different ways. And I think what we're looking at with AI is, firstly, it's accelerating. And basically, decisions are being made. So it's being used in the police force. It's being used in the judiciary. It's being used by banks. So of course, the internet is hugely influential. What we read, if someone pays for their advert to go into Google, you read that first. Loads of people read that. So the internet has already started shaping our consciousness. Or we even look at, media monopolies. We know who controls the big media, and we know what messages they produce as well. But I think this accelerates it. intensifies it, and it leads in a much more direct way to decisions being taken. And it leads to decisions being taken where we can't actually unpick it, and we can't understand where the decisions came from, where the data came from, etc. You could say the same, you know, the internet captured a lot of data as well, but I think even with the internet, art wasn't being captured in the same way. You know, Spotify captures music, but it's still, you know, the Rolling Stones or whatever, it's still their music. Spotify doesn't take that music, change it, transform it, and reproduce it as something else. So I think it's a continuation, but there are also some sharp differences as well.
Here's the good news, is that the panel that starts at 10 is talking about existential threats to higher education, including this. So rather than thinking of this as a big break, let us think of it as a brief pause to get a cup of coffee and to move to next door. But please, can you join me in thanking Rajani so much?